What's going on, my good people? Mike Hidalgo here. Thank you for joining me on another FCP Euro DIY. Today, we're going to be working on a 2018 Volkswagen Atlas. Today on the Atlas behind me, we're going to be covering how to replace your front brakes. Today we have an OE kit which is available on fcpro.com along with a couple different other options. We have some Brembo style rotors. We have some new caliper hardware, new set screws. We're going to be running Akebono pads today, the ceramic low dust, no dust pad option. The Akebonos also include the new anti-rattle clips for the pads in them. Typically, these are going to last you anywhere from 40 to 60,000 miles. It really depends on the kind of driving you do. And if you want to learn a little bit more about what to check for when it's time to replace your brakes, be sure to click the video in the description below. That's going to talk about how to check your brakes, how to measure pads, and all that good stuff that you want to know before getting into a DIY like this. But before we get started on this actual job, let's take a look at some of the tools we're going to need. For this DIY, we're going to need a couple tools. It may look like we have a lot on the table, but a lot of it can be repetitive. You're going to need a torque wrench. We have a 1/2-inch drive ratchet, 3/8 drive, and 1/4 inch. Again, you could probably supplement depending on the type of sockets you have at home. Sockets wise, we're going to need a 17 for our lug bolts. We have a 21 mil socket, a 13 mil, and a T30. We have two 21s here. Again, just working with the different ratchets we have. Wire brushes always come in handy along with a small flathead screwdriver. To kind of hold the guide pins on the caliper carriers, a thin wrench always helps. A 17 mil is going to fit around the hex heads on those, or a small pair of needle nose pliers. We have a large hammer in case we have to smash some rotors off. Caliper hook, again, zip ties, wire hanger, anything like that will work. This is a piston compressor tool. This does have a dual piston setup, so it's a little bit larger than your standard single piston. You can't really use the single screw-in one that we typically use on these simpler brake jobs. It might push in the pistons a little bit cockeyed, and then you have a bigger problem than just doing a brake job. Paint pen for marking our hardware. Brake clean is going to come in handy. We have the Liquimali ceramic paste, or multi-use paste. That's my favorite stuff. You've seen me use it on every brake job. And of course, power tools just to speed up the process a little bit. Now we know what we're working with. Let's go ahead and get started. All right, my good people, we have the passenger side up in the air right now. We're going to be doing this on the front passenger. However, the steps are going to be identical for both sides. We're going to start by removing the beauty covers on the wheel, if your vehicle still has those. I'm just going to use the Volkswagen tool that's in the trunk of the car. Small pick will do the trick as well. With that off, we have 5 17mm lug bolts to remove. If you're doing this on the ground or in the garage and you don't have an impact gun, keep the wheel on the ground, break these free with your breaker bar, then raise up the vehicle and remove them the rest of the way. Now with that we have the wheel off, we have a better view of where we're working. Before we go any further, we want to make sure that our set screw is going to come off. That's going to be a T30. I like to use my small flathead screwdriver, and I just like to stick it into the vein of the brake disc just to jam it up against the caliper carrier to keep everything from spinning. Then we can take our T30 and try to break that free. If it's pretty crusty, use a little bit of penetrating fluid first. We're not going to remove it all the way just yet, but this one's actually hand loose, which is not ideal. The torque spec isn't a lot for those, so it could have just vibrated loose, but we'll make sure to snug the new one up later. Now we know that's going to come off. Let's work on getting our brake caliper off. We'll get our caliper hook ready to rock. Let's get to it. I'm going to start with the bottom 13mm bolt. I'm going to use my thin 17 to counter hold the guide pin on the inside. And I'm just going to try the electric ratchet to break it free. If you're not going to be replacing this hardware, just be sure to clean the old Loctite off the threads, clean it up nicely, apply some fresh stuff when you reinstall everything. Now you'll notice the top one is a little bit different looking, still a 13mm head, but this one's weighted, just the design of how they are. So kind of easy to not mix up. Beautiful. Now with the two 13s removed, we can pull our brake caliper off. If you need more room to swing it around, or depending on the type of hook you're using, you'll notice that the soft line runs through the front of the strut here. There's a little bracket that holds it in. You can remove this clip and then have a little bit more play on the hose. But for what we're doing today, we don't really need that. But it's right here if you do need to swing it out of the way, or maybe you're doing a different job and you're just looking for torque specs on this video. Before we hang our caliper up though, we're just gonna rest it on top here for one moment. We're going to take one of our old pads and we're going to set that in like so. Then we're going to use the pad to help compress the pistons back in. Again, be mindful. You can do this a couple ways. You can break open the bleeder valve and release the fluid through there, or just keep an eye on the reservoir up top and make sure that it doesn't overflow. This fluid has not been opened up on the system, so it should still have the correct amount, meaning that no one topped it off to compensate for low pads or anything like that. So we're not going to pressurize anything weirdly. And it's fairly new still, so we're not too worried about pushing the fluid back in. All right. Once it bottoms out, that's all it's going to go. We can take our tool out, take our old pad off, and now you can see that we have our pistons nice and compressed, nice and even with the seals. Take some time to clean this up a little bit if you want. Hit it with a little bit of brake clean, just so that it's ready to go when you assemble everything in a little bit. Again, notice we're doing this all with the old stuff still installed. You don't really want to do this and clean it up and get your new parts all dirty or grimy. And then we'll just take our caliper hook, throw it around one of the coil springs on the strut, and then feed the caliper hook through the bolt hole, just let it hang to the side. Back on the rotor and pads and our carrier, I'll take this old pad out. These clips oftentimes come included with the pads that you're purchasing. So in this case, the Akebono pads come with new clips. Sometimes the pads come with the 13mm bolts. It all depends on what you're installing. So we're going to pop these old clips off and install the new ones that came in our kit, but they can be reused, especially if the vehicle is fairly new and they're in good shape. But since we have them, we'll pop these off and we'll show you how to install them. Also, it's pretty hard to mix them up, but note the orientation of the clip. The little tab is going to be sticking out away from the brake disc on both sides. They only go in one way. Okay, with those off, we're going to just clean this up a little bit now. Again, I'm just going to brake clean it while it's on the old setup. So here are our two 21mm bolts. I'm going to break both of them free with the 1/2-inch ratchet, and then we'll zap them off with the small 3/8 drive ratchet. A shallower 21mm socket would be kind of nicer for this. Ours just happened to grow feet before the video, but just something to keep in mind. All right, now that our caliper carrier bracket is off, we can work on getting the brake disc the rest of the way off. This one's nice and loose, so we don't have to worry about hammering it off. For that, again, T30 to pull it off the rest of the way. I'm assuming ours was loose simply due to the fact that the set screw was loose, so another good reason to make sure everything's nice and torqued properly. Okay, now that we have that off, this is a great time to wire wheel any corrosion on your hub. We're just going to use the small wire brush that we have. This car isn't in too bad of shape, so this should be all we need. Then we'll brake clean it off. We'll get our liquid moly paste over here. Now we'll take our paste and just coat the ridge on where the disc sits. Again, this not mandatory, but for us that live in New England, the car is going to see salt. It's going to get seized on there. This will just help it. Depending on the rotor you're installing, some of them do have a protective coating, and they don't really recommend you use any of this, but the reality is, for where we live, this is always needed. It's not going to hurt anything. You're going to be fine. Now, let's grab our new brake disc. I'm going to clean up my hands a little bit so I don't get dirty fingerprints on the rotor, and then we can go ahead and set that in with our new set screw. A little bit of ceramic paste on the threads of the set screw. That'll keep it from seizing on us. I would rather have to just wipe off the excess than deal with drilling one out in the future. Now we're going to grab our brake disc, feed that onto our hub, line up the hole for the set screw. Also, if you smear around the blue goodness in there, it's not going to hurt anything. If you don't want to put any on the screw, instead you want to do it on the face of the disc, you can do that as well. That'll just also keep the set screw from seizing to the brake disc. Again, T30, we're just going to snug this up using the calibrated fingers, but no more than 8 to 10 Newton meters for that T30. I like to encapsulate it and a little bit more paste. This is completely overkill, but it'll make it a little bit easier for the next person to do this brake job. Now with that, we're gonna prep our caliper carrier bracket. Remember, we already popped the old clips off of them. So now we're gonna install the new one, so let's do that now. Here's our new metal clip. Again, there is a little tab or side that protrudes more. That's always gonna face away from the brake disc. And there's little tabs here to help guide you onto the bracket itself. So once you have it kind of lined up, push it down. This can be a little bit of a pain in the butt sometimes, but just use your fingers. You can use a flathead if you need to help push the tabs around, and then it should look like that. So let's do the same thing to the other three sides. Now we'll slide our bracket over. Let's start the bottom one just to help line us up. And now these get torqued to 200 Newton meters. And while I have you back here, we'll start with the rear pad first. I like to put a little bit of paste on the ears where it rides on the clips, just to keep everything nice and flowing, keeping the pads from jamming up and causing any squeaking or anything like that. It's not a Picasso painting, don't go crazy, and don't get it on the pad surface. You're gonna push the ears of the pads to key into these little tabs. You're gonna push against this clip here, and that should pop right in. Now this is totally dealer's choice if you want to put a little paste on the surface of the pistons or the back here on the front where it rides on the outer pad. It kind of just keeps things from getting noisy. It protects the surface on the pistons a little bit from corroding over time. So totally dealer's choice, not mandatory, not in the rule book, but just something that I like to do depending on the car really. All right. Let's slide this baby over. And if you're having a hard time putting this brake disc on, check your guide pins. Sometimes these kind of squeeze out and block you from getting the caliper back on. Beautiful. Now we're going to start with our weighted 13mm bolt. Get that one to hang up the caliper. Just start it by hand. A couple threads is all we need. Again, don't forget to apply Loctite to the threads if you're reusing your hardware. Get the bottom one started. And then super gently, I'm going to use the electric ratchet with the 13 just to barely snug these up, and then we'll torque them down. 17 the counter hold, 13 on the ratchet. Now we're going to torque those two 13s to 35 Newton meters. And now with that, all we really have left to do is throw on our wheel. So let's go grab that big baby and throw it back on. We're just gonna use the impact to gently snug up the wheel to the hub. That way, once the car is back on the ground, the wheel isn't at a cocked position and we can torque the lug bolts properly. Now let's bring this baby down and torque them up. We have our torque wrench set to 140 Newton meters, 17mm socket. Tighten these down in a crisscross pattern. And if you still have them, don't forget to throw your beauty covers back on. Otherwise, my good people, that is going to conclude this DIY for today. Overall, a really easy and straightforward job on the Atlas. Something you can definitely do in the driveway or in the garage floor. The lift is not necessary, but it makes filming easier. If you like this video, please be sure to give it a thumbs up. If you have any questions or comments on what we did today, leave those in the comment section below. And if you like this DIY and you want to see more like them, please consider subscribing. We're making new ones all the time. As always, thank you for watching. I'll catch you on the next one.